My name is Maggie Mullane and I live in Sydney, Australia. I'm a full-time housewife, mum, general run-around, do everything sort of stuff. I thought it was really interesting because I'd never really thought beyond myself and my family as far as our Indo connection, not really thinking that it extended across the world. It was just my family here in Australia and my family in the Netherlands. My father was born and brought up in Indonesia. He was born in 1910. He was one of 8 children, and both his mother and father had Indonesian mothers. I think they were Javanese, and their fathers were Dutch heritage. My father's father was a German who adopted my grandfather. My mother's side is Irish Australian. They arrived in Australia in the 1800s. Irish. After the war, in the 1950s, when the Dutch tended to leave Indonesia, some of Dad's family went to the Netherlands and some came to Australia. One uncle, he did come to Australia and then ultimately he moved to the United States. And then my parents met in Victoria in 1956. They were both living in Canberra, working there, and they went down to the 1956 Olympics in Melbourne, and then on the bus home they stopped. They were both on the same bus and they just met at a cafe there when the bus stopped. And so Canberra then was a very small place, so they started going out and got married in 1958, I think. After he was released from the Japanese prison camp, the soldiers were sent to different places to try and, I guess, fatten them up a bit before they sent them home to their families in Indonesia. So my father was sent to Bundaberg in Queensland, and he fell in love with the place and he thought he'd come back. So after he went back to Indonesia to be demobilised, he then went to Egypt in 1947 and spent 2 years working for an engineering company on the Nile Delta, building a dam. And then in the early 1950s, he came to Australia. I don't know why he didn't go to Holland, but by then his family had sort of spread itself and he decided to come to Australia. Because of his love of Australia, that first trip in 1946, I suppose it would have been, when he went to Bundaberg, He always said how much he loved his time in Bundaberg. And I think he also did a trip down to Melbourne. I don't know how he got there, but the story goes that when he got to Melbourne, he got off a tram on St Kilda Road and met his brother, who had been released from another Japanese camp and had been sent to Melbourne. And so his brother was just out walking. My father got off the tram. They hadn't seen each other since they were taken to Japan in, I guess it was 1942. And so he ran into his brother on St Kilda Road in Melbourne. So I think that would have been a bit of a shock.
Yeah.
Not expecting to see. I don't know if at that stage they knew where each other were, but it would have been a nice reunion. It would have been a lovely thing to see. He never said he had any discrimination here. He spoke very good English, mind you, with an accent. But I think, I guess whiter Europeans were accepted here more than, say, the Italians or the Greeks, who were obviously darker skinned than my father. He sounded like he had a very happy and privileged childhood. He went to the Netherlands to do his engineering degree, and I think he fooled around a bit, and I think he failed some of the exams, and then his father got annoyed with him. So, but I think he had quite a happy childhood. He was part of the Scouts in Indonesia, and so in 1933 he went to Hungary for the Jamboree. He'd also spent some time in Austria. I've got diaries of different trips he's done. He did with his friends. He kept very detailed diaries, but they're all in Dutch, so I can't read them, which is a shame. So I must get someone to translate them at some point. And he had that time in in Hungary, and I think he actually had a bit of a girlfriend there while he was there. He loved the European lifestyle, the culture. He loved opera, classical music. He got that from the Dutch side. I got married in Ireland in 1989, and he and my mum came over for that. And on that same trip, they went and visited the Netherlands and family there. Most of the time, the family came out to us in Australia. My parents came over for the wedding, that was the first time Dad had been able to leave Australia. Since he'd got there, he'd never had the money to travel. Mm-hmm. So this was a big thing for him. And he also went back to Innsbruck because he'd loved that so much. So he took Mum there and showed her Innsbruck. And that in the 1970s, Australians were pretty much a roast dinner or grilled chops or things like that. We always had really quite different food, European food. Dad used to make his own sambal, so the house often smelt of trussie, and so it was kind of embarrassing when my friends came over and there were these strange smells in the house. Mm-hmm. But apart from that, he was very hands-on Dad. He used to take us fishing. We'd go away to the beach every summer holidays. So he certainly embraced the Australian lifestyle. As far as, it was pretty much an Australian upbringing apart from the food. At Christmas time, I suppose we probably did a bit of a celebration on Christmas Eve, which again was more of a Dutch thing than an Australian thing. Yeah, I'd love to see where Dad grew up, but I have this feeling that it's going to be totally different now. He grew up in Jakarta, so which I get the impression is just a big, bustling, dirty city, and I'm not sure. I think I want to keep the beauty of what I imagine sacred, rather than go and have it all demolished by just arriving in some big dirty city. My kids are interested. They find it fascinating that they have, well, they're 1/8 Indonesian, because we look at ourselves and we don't see that at all. And they look at me and say, well, you don't look Indonesian, you don't look Asian. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's the thing, identity is all about, it's how you look. But there's so much more to it than that you just sort of think, I am who I am because of how I look, not by who I am or what your culture is. Kids find it difficult to identify with having any Indonesian. When Dad was about 8 or 9, in a whole family group, and our son, that could have been our son sitting there when he was 8 or 9. Yeah. He looked so much like my dad. And my cousin, who has seen our son grow up, says she calls him Hunchen, little Hunts. My father's name was Hunts. Mm-hmm. So he looks like a little miniature of my father. Well, he did when he was little, not so much now. Yeah. But again, it's about looks, isn't it? Yeah. It shouldn't be, but that's what it tends to be. It was 1961, Oma in the Netherlands. That's 20th of November 1921.